Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
In this episode, we're talking to Terry Vainoras of Subterranean Disposition. Thanks for being with us, Terry.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's really, really special to have a chat with you both.
Oh, thank you so much for saying so. So just to start out, as we kind of always do, how would you describe Subterranean Disposition's music to someone who's never heard it before? What kind of genre of metal would you say it falls under, and why?
Okay. Well, the basis of Subterranean Disposition is a doom death metal. So it has that doom element, the slow element, and the sort of forlorn melodic element in the music. And then it has the death metal, which I equate to the guttural vocals and like the drumming and the double kicks and stuff like that. So that's the basis of what Subterranean is. And from there, we sort of experiment with some other mixes of genres. We have a little bit of sludge in there at points. And we've also been labelled an experimental metal band as well, with just the use of saxophone and some other sort of foreign instruments over the course of some of the albums we've done. So yeah, I would say doom death, experimental metal.
Well, that does fit with your categorization on Encyclopedia Metallum. You are listed as a doom death band. Yep. Is there any particular label that you gravitate towards, or are you happy with, kind of different people or, different, interviewers even kind of labeling you in different ways?
I'm happy for all sorts of different ideas that people bring, because ultimately it's about what they get out of the music. Sometimes people will come up to me and they're like, oh, this reminds me of this. And for me, my intentions were nowhere near whatever band or genre that they were talking about. But if that's what they're getting out of it, then so be it. And that might put me onto a new source of inspiration myself. It was like, I would never, in some cases be like, oh, I would never think that's where sort of some of the music would fit in or whatever. So yeah, I'm not hard or fast with any of those sorts of things. It's metal, and it has a whole range of influences. So I'm happy for whatever anyone brings up,
So speaking of this range of influences, were doom and death metal the genres that got you into metal, or is that just kind of where the band's fallen after, a more varied career?
Well, I suppose I should sort of say that, like, I've been playing in lots of bands over 30 years now. Subterranean has been around for about 10 of those 30 years. So it wasn't the first thing that I gravitated towards in the metal world. Back in the day, it was thrash metal in the late 80s and early 90s, and I started playing in bands in the mid 90s. And went from thrash to death metal, and then into the extreme scene, where I played in lots of bands that were specific genres like black metal, doom metal. So I was introduced to doom metal around the early 2000s, I believe. But yeah, lots of different sort of metal influences. And I guess being that Subterranean's like way further down my sort of career, of like, I have doom and death metal as a base, but then I can hear little bits of some of the other genres come through in some of the music too. So it's a big melting pot with doom and death as the basis.
Was it tricky to discover some of these genres or artists back in 1980s Australia or so?
It was definitely different than what anyone can do today. Obviously, with the internet and all of this sort of thing. Yeah, it was harder, and it was more like a feeling of like like finding gold when you come across something that you really liked. You would have to go into a record store, and hopefully you could like listen to something in the store perhaps, or you would read a zine or a metal magazine, and then there might be a write-up that sort of said, oh, if you like Carcass, then you like this kind of thing, and that would lead you down the track there. It was much more of a laboured process looking back on it now, but I find that it was really a golden era because it didn't feel more genuine, but it just felt like when you really came onto something that you liked, it was like amazing. It was a really, really good feeling. Whereas now it's sort of, you can scroll through a million bands on the internet and still find stuff that you love as well. But it's just a different time and place, I guess. Just show my age a little bit, but yeah.
So how did you go like finding lyrics during that time then? Like, I mean, did you like do as others have discussed in the podcast and like read lyric books, or like how accessible was that?
So yeah, it was all down to the tapes, and then obviously the CDs and records, of course, as well. And it's just like, yeah, mostly everyone was putting their lyrics in there for digestion. So yeah, it was good. I always felt that I would sit down with a release personally, and do the whole thing of like sitting there and having the music play, and then poring over the lyrics and seeing how the person went about like writing their lyrics and how their cadence was to the effect of the music. And that would also like inspire me to try different things over music that I was writing too. So yeah.
Do you remember any particular experiences that kind of solidified an understanding of what metal lyrics kind of looked like or sounded like, or what the language inside them was like during this early process?
That's interesting. I mean, I guess for me, discovering all the death metal stuff, it was much like there was so much different characteristics in between some of the bands. Like you would have like your Cannibal Corpses and the gory sort of lyrics, but then you would also have your cynics, and you would have like more metaphysical lyrics, and death, which was like early was a bit more gory, and then went on to more like personal or sort of larger topics. So there wasn't sort of one sort of thing that I sort of gravitated to. I just tried to sponge it all up, and some things that I liked more than other things. Gore and horror has kind of never been my sort of go-to, which is kind of weird to say as a metalhead, but I tended to follow like some of the lyrics that had a little bit more depth and something that I could sort of chew on, because I guess essentially I was a metalhead that was a book nerd as well. So I wanted to sort of bridge that gap in between what I love to read about and also having something of that I thought was of substance within like a really, awesome soundtrack in a metal band.
If you were to be presented with like two sets of lyrics from, songs from different genres, that you could identify which of those was metal?
Well, yeah, I would say so. I mean, yeah, it's all about like sort of, for me, you can sort of tell if I was given sort of the blind test of like, all right, there's a couple of sets of lyrics, like you say, and if is it metal or not. I guess it's in like sort of the energy of the lines and how it's sort of being put forward and stuff like that. But then there's always sort of exceptions to that rule. Like, I mean, you wouldn't think that, singing about Ned Flanders or anything like that would be a metal thing, but then there's a metal band that does that, so you could be thrown by something like that. But generally speaking, certain tone and energy that you can pick up on that you would say that's metal. But if you ask me to describe it in more detail, I would probably have... it's kind of hard to say what that exactly is. It's more of a feeling, I guess.
What about in terms of quality? Like, what would you say make for good metal lyrics versus bad metal lyrics? Like, what attributes or what kind of forms put a line between those two categories?
Well, for me personally, I guess it's about how sort of the flow of the words is, and it just depends, because like metal is so broad. There's things that I would say is definitely cheesy, but in the context of what the particular band is, it's acceptable and it's fun. Whereas, like, I guess for myself, as I was saying before, I really like to sort of sit there and sort of like delve into the words, like book and read it, and to the essence of that particular lyricist was trying to sort of convey, and also how I feel about it. And so I mean, there's stuff there like from sort of Dark Throne where I would be like, oh, okay, that's cheesy, but like that's in the context of how they're portraying that sort of thing, that's sort of fun.
What about the other hand? What makes for bad? Like you mentioned flow, right? What does it mean to have good flow or bad flow in a genre that is marked by dissonance and atonality and arrhythms and basically opposition to, like, we have a subgenre called melodic death metal, right? Which presumes that if you don't have that suffix, you're not melodic, right? So the idea that melody itself is not expected in a metal album. Given all that, how do you define flow and what does that mean in this kind of context?
Yeah, no, I get you. Well, in the context of that, it's like the flow, as in, I would say, as a lyricist, obviously you have your guitar riffs and you have your drum beats, and they're the main driving components. And where I like to sit is somewhere in between them. So, like, when I mean flow, I mean like the syncopation that might be playing off the guitar riff or following the guitar riff, or it might be dipping in and out of the drum beat and the guitar riff, or it's more like in tune with like a certain syncopation of the drums or something like that. So there's different flows, and I guess within like maybe sort of old school death metal, they would do stuff where it's a bit more like a couple of words and then let the riff breathe and then go again, and that's one type of flow. And then there's other flows like just off the top of my head, like Psychroptic, he can get into a flow where it's a bit more going forward, and it's almost like kind of almost in a sort of hip hop fashion. There's a lot of punctuation and like sort of just flowing on sort of thing. So like there's no sort of stopping in between parts of the riff or whatever. So that's kind of what I mean about the flow of how they're presenting their words against the backdrop of the music. That's sort of what I look for as I'm listening, and it's catching my ear. And then when I hear something, it's like, that's awesome flow, I need to go and hear how those words interact with the music. Like, because oftentimes with, as you're saying, even with melodic death metal, a lot of it's still guttural, so you're not always catching the words on the first go around. So that'll make me like, I'll be like, oh, this guy's flow is really good. I'll go back in and I'll see what words he's using to punctuate certain things that's caught my ear.
Right. So is it mainly just about like how the lyrics fit with the music? Is that like kind of the primary kind of criteria that you have for like good versus bad lyrics?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the first thing there, because like the lyrics aren't there by themselves. You don't just have people like screaming a cappella or anything like that. So that's the very first thing. But then the second thing is, like, as I was saying, go onto the lyric sheet and just see, there's like a energy of the written word, I guess. And just how that's presented, like within like the CD or whatever, and just see how they've written their lines. It's something that I like to do when I've like finished some lyrics. I'll like look at it and I'll see just from a visual perspective. It's kind of strange, but like I sometimes will sort of change some of the lyrics just based off the actual visual of it. Sometimes I'm like, nah, this is not looking right. It's really, really hard to describe, but yeah, it's I mean, yeah, and it's also like, I guess, yeah, the energy of those lines and like sort of the poetry in between the different lines, and they might have like a longer line and a couple of short lines. However, anything is punctuated to flow through and make their story come to life, I guess.
So when did you start actually writing any lyrics at all? Like, this seems like a process you developed over a long time, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, in my very, very first band, we all got together, and I'm a multi-instrumentalist as well as a vocalist. But at the time, we were all just getting together and having a jam, and suddenly I got nominated to be the vocalist. They were like, "All right, Terry's going to do that," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I guess I had a little bit of an attraction to words and vocals, so I took that on, and I started writing very, very badly at the start, just imitating sort of things that I'd heard within some of the thrash, the Metallica and the Napalm Death, and just sort of aping those sort of feelings and sort of lyrics. But obviously in a very teenage way. I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I just sort of went from there. And every band that I sort of, well, not every band, but a lot of bands that I was in, I just naturally fell into that position. And depending on who was in the band and what sort of sound and sort of vision we wanted to portray, some of the lyrics would change up, and I was able to do different styles. And yeah, it's been a really long journey, and I'm still happy to say that I still get excited to sit down once I've written some music and start that process. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do this time? You know, it's been a long time, but I still have that passion for putting those words and then getting those right tones as the singer or the growler as well.
During any part of this history, have you ever been like worried about whether or not the lyrics feel metal enough? Like, was that something that, it doesn't sound to me like that's something that happens to you now, but like when you were younger, writing those, as you refer to them, kind of, you know, Metallica rip-off lyrics or whatever, was there like this has to sound like metal in a certain way, or this line isn't metal enough? Was that ever a concern that you're willing to admit to within your, history of writing?
No, I don't feel like it was ever a concern, and I guess no one really sort of checked me on anything too much. I had one band, Order of Chaos, and they used to call me Dictionary Man, but I mean, that was just because I put a lot of words in there that they didn't particularly understand at the time. So that was a little moniker that I got. But as far as actual, like whether thinking it was or not, or peers for anything in particular, no, not at all. It was like I was given sort of free rein to express myself, and no one really sort of queried me about any of my approaches, which has been great.
Well, it's funny that you say Dictionary Man, because one of the kind of ongoing debates, one of two that I'm going to ask you about on this podcast, has been whether or not, it's acceptable to use a thesaurus when writing lyrics. So where do you stand in that debate?
I say do whatever you need to do to get to that point where you're happy with the words you're using to express the song that needs to be finished. So yes, I have used thesauruses before. Sometimes I'll have a feeling or I'll have a line, and when you're sort of like in conversation and you just can't find that right word, it's just not coming to you. And then so I would definitely go like looking nowadays online sometimes, but definitely had a thesaurus and would like look up stuff and be like, oh, okay, I needed this kind of word. And then they would have like suggestions for other similar kind of words. And I would delve in there and see what their meanings were and try and get the right one. And also it's also about how the word comes out, as well as the phrasing of it, and the feeling of like growling a certain word can be quite enticing. So sometimes the more dictionary kind of words is kind of cool to try and fit into the tempo of the music, and the tone that you're using as well can be a challenge. So yes, definitely thesauruses is all good. whatever is needed. Sometimes you need to sort of go and take inspiration from wherever you can find it.
Well, this actually relates to the next debate I was going to ask you about, which is whether or not extreme metal should be viewed as escapist fantasy and entertainment, or a true reflection of the artist's own views, politics, and identities. So what do you think regarding this particular question?
Well, I would take that on face value of the different bands, because within the very broad metal community, you have all of those things. You have things that are genuinely fantasy, and you have things that are genuinely someone, bearing their soul through words. And sometimes that's not always easy to differentiate. I understand. But I mean, yeah, I think sort of, I don't want it to be a cop-out, but I think sort of anything goes as far as how you someone is able to imaginatively express themselves, really. I don't think there should be one way, or like people should say, no, you can't do this or can't do that. It's just about the interpretation the writer has, and then the interpretation the listener and the reader has, really.
Well, now that we've kind of started talking about your lyrical process, we do want to kind of move to a more specific discussion of your lyrical choices. But before we do that, we wanted to kind of first talk kind of broadly about your use of instruments, because, as you've kind of alluded to earlier, you have previously featured instruments that we don't often see in this subgenre, including the saxophone, as well as the kamanche and gaitak. The latter two being Iranian string instruments, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Sorry for the pronunciation there. So how does writing music using those kinds of instruments that we do rarely see in extreme metal impact on how you write lyrics that accompany that music?
That's really interesting. Well, and initially I would answer that as in being, I'm not sure that it's had much impact on lyrics initially. So with Subterranean, obviously we're coming up on our third album that's going to be released in a couple of weeks' time. The first album only featured a little bit of saxophone, just in one particular song. So for that, it was an instrumental passage. And I guess in the second album, it was used in a very similar way. So when there was no vocals there, and we would have more of an ambient, a doom with sort of brushes on the drums, almost a doom jazz kind of vibe, I guess you could say. That was more like a departure from like some of the doom death where the lyrics would traditionally go. But with this new album, Individuation, I've sort of grown as a saxophone player, and I was able to incorporate it into more of the heavier sections. And for some of that, I dare say, because it was being interspersed within lyrics, so it was more so a case of trying to say more with less, because I know I was going to share the verse with the saxophone. So it would be like maybe one or two lines of vocals, and then we would have some saxophone phrasing, and then I might come back around and bookend with some more vocals. So it was more about sharing the space with a vocal-like instrument, a melodic vocal-like instrument. So I think that's where it's sort of, for me personally, with the saxophone there. And the other instruments that you were talking about was in one song called Embittered on Contagium and the Landscapes of Failure, the second album. That was a sort of another instrumental section, and also Galare Por, who was the Iranian-born lady that was cool enough to collaborate with me. She took her vocals from an ancient poet. I think his name was Rumi, R-U-M-I, And so Galara, she took some of his sort of poetry from a few centuries ago and sort of added that in an ambient context over her Comanche and Corncheck parts. So that's how she sort of put that together to make it that sort of world doom metal section, I guess you could sort of say. So that's how that sort of fits in with Subterranean and what we've done up until now.
Well, talking more about lyrics specifically, across your three full-length releases, including the upcoming one, we noticed that although your first and last albums were produced more than 10 years apart, there's definitely some lyrical themes that continue to appear throughout like your entire catalog. Specifically, we noted references to death repeated. For instance, there are lines like "body displaced, so slow this heart beats, yet not enough to let myself be. Racing through, search for some reprieve, I'm not yet ready to leave." From "Wailing My Keen" off your first album. And then there are lines like "As the sun does set, and I too shall follow, below the dirt. Gnarled body overstayed the welcome upon this mortal coil" from "Haunted Optimist" of your latest release. At the same time, there are also references to cycles of change and rebirth, like you have lines such as, "And then at the end, we meet the beginning again, the most subtle of storms" is the song, and "Come full circle again" from "Prolonging This Agony," both from your first album. And then "Again Reborn, I Shall Conquer" from "Arduous Becoming," and "Seamless Integration of Shadow and Self, Unbalanced Pieces Brought Whole, the Circle Infinite and Centered" off your latest album. These all reference cycles, circles of rebirth, or something starting again. Then you also have references to time and changes. For instance, tracks from the first album of lines like "Lost Upon Aquarius Trail," "Alarm Bells Toll," "Duly Ringing Deaf to the Modern Ear," or "Fear Cultivation Through the Centuries," for "6 Years in the Eye of a Storm." And then your latest album has lines like "Employ these remnants of a dream to cleave the curve on which the time will grade," and "Mouths of modern madness spewed dissonance." And indeed, the first song from both your first and last album reference a process of becoming. So why do you think you've continued to embed these themes of death, dying, but then also rebirth and change across over more than a decade of writing music for this project?
That's a very, very, very good question.
Just wrote that question. It's very good.
Yeah, well, when you put it like that, like, I guess as a lyricist, I'm sort of like most focused on what's in front of me. And once things are recorded, they sort of like the children, they get sent off into the world. And so you don't often, well, me personally, I don't often sort of look back to see if there's any sort of reoccurring things, even though, like, I guess sometimes subconsciously I sort of do know that. But I guess, like, within this music, I guess that sort of inspires me to sort of bring in some of those things. Like I read and think about a lot of these topics that sort of you just sort of covered within these lyrics. And for some of the other bands that I've done, that wouldn't have definitely not be appropriate. So I think, as in within this doom death metal, we have these 10-minute tracks with sort of like sprawling. There's lots of room to sort of be contemplative, I guess, in a sense. So yeah, I kind of, that's sort of what sort of comes up in response to the music first. And then sometimes I might have like specific ideas that I want to get across, and then some music will come and I'm like, this is the perfect thing. This is these things should be together, basically. So, but as far as the recurring things, I guess, like Subterranean Disposition is kind of like a bit of a personal meditation on sort of death, birth, the cycles of life that we see and that we journey through, and the way we sort of feel about it and the way we navigate it personally, our inner worlds, and also our outer worlds, and how that reflects back to us as well. So yeah, I guess Subterranean's just sort of this playground where I can sort of stretch out on some of these topics, hence these things sort of coming up time and again in different songs and in different ways that I can sort of express that at the time that I was writing it. So yeah, given that it's been like 10 years now, it's not really surprising that I would hear that, like, yeah, like the first song off the first album and the first song off the new album have some sort of similarities in a lyrical context. And hopefully, given that time has passed, I'm maybe able to articulate those things in a slightly better way than I had at the start, you know. But it's not really for me to judge, I guess.
Well, we'll definitely talk about some of the similarities and differences that we observed in your lyrics across your different releases.
Awesome.
But in terms of another trend that we saw in terms of theme, was, we've noticed that across your albums, there's a lot of references to colours. So on the first album, there are 8 uses of colour words. So 1 of black, 3 of blue, 4 of red, and then 2 uses of the word colours itself. On your second album, there's both less discussion and less variety, with just 3 uses of black. And then on this new record, we have 3 uses of black, 1 white, 1 red, and a yellow, giving us 7 in total. So this variety is partially just due to, just one line, so through black, white, red, and yellow. But we're curious if there's any pattern here between the rise and fall, and then, I suppose, rise again of colour words.
Wow, that is really, really interesting. And yeah, I'm a bit stumped, actually. My initial response would be that the second album, Contagion, maybe it's kind of like a pseudo concept album in a post-apocalyptic world, basically. And so if there was only sort of the color black mentioned, I would sort of go, okay, cool. Well, yeah, I was trying to paint a very bleak picture of a post-civilized world, a la like Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road, basically. There was a lot of influence from that at the time. Veil to Cormac McCarthy, who passed recently. But as far as like the first album and the second one, maybe they're more akin to each other with more uses of color, just in some of the sort of maybe spiritual-esque or metaphysical sort of little sort of lines and approaches there. So with the new album, you mentioned black, white, red and yellow, I believe that was the colors for the alchemical process. So I was just sort of detailing that in that song, and I'm not really sure about the exact color references in the first self-titled album, but I'm sure, like, it feels like maybe within these 3 albums there's a sort of a bit of a bookend of trilogy in between. Contagion being sort of a concept of its own, and the other 2 albums sort of being a little bit more open lyrically, but still somewhat connected to. Very interesting. Yeah, it's not something I would have picked up on at all.
Well, why do you think you started out avoiding black, just using it once on the first album, and now it's become the dominant color reference on the second and the third? Is it just more metal? Is it just like the more metal color?
Yes, that's all it is. I just wanted to be more metal.
Okay, all right, we're done. That's good. Thanks for coming. We got it. We got someone to admit it. It's that's something else we've been looking for the whole time.
Well, there's definite times when I can have a chuckle at myself if I look back at something. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to be metal as all hell on a particular thing. But to be honest, it's not something that I was consciously aware of. I guess I was just approaching, lyrics from one song at a time basis, or even just sometimes one line at a time, really. It's kind of surprising to sort of get that sort of feedback about it. I'll get back to you on it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah.
Well, for another theme that we've identified as well is you talk a fair bit about fire. So your first album has 1 use of fire, 2 uses of flame, 5 uses of burn, and then your second has nothing at all, actually. And this new album has 2 uses of fire, 3 references to the sun, and then 1 use of a blaze. So this isn't the most fire references that we've ever seen on this podcast by any means, but words like snow, cold, or freeze don't really appear at all in your lyrics, just one kind of frozen silence. So yeah, wouldn't cold be a kind of a more perhaps common companion for subterranean disposition?
Yeah, well, it could be, but I guess like within the name and some of the album covers, it's actually more like cave metal. So the snow wouldn't really get into the cave too much. It's more about creating that little fire within the cave. So yeah, it's really interesting because as you were sort of describing all the fire and the sun stuff, it just brought all the album covers to mind. The first one was a photo I took in a cave in New South Wales that was just playing with the light of some of the crystals down in that cave, and it does definitely look like fire. And yeah, the second album cover is like a painting, which is kind of sort of a blood red sky, basically apocalyptic sky. And then this third one is two people going into the cave to find themselves, perhaps. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. I equate snow more with the black metal and stuff. Obviously, being in Australia, we do have snow, of course, but I definitely never been a snow person myself. And I guess I equate sort of my surroundings a bit more with like the dreaded summer. Being a redhead, I like to hang out in caves all summer.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, really, really interesting.
Our people are meant for here.
Sorry?
Our people are meant to live here, but that's okay. We're here anyway.
Yeah, that's it. But we still prosper. We still survive.
We do our best. In case.
Yeah, but the fire references, I guess, would also like, I would personally separate them out to specific things that I was thinking about songs. But like taken in an overview as you suggested, there's a song of maybe I should go back and study my own lyrics and just see where that's headed, and that might give me some more inspiration for further works for sure.
Why do you think you dropped them on the second album?
I'm not sure, but again, as I was sort of alluding to, I think I was like really focused on trying to present a very dark world within that record. Basically, a world without sort of electricity to a point. There's actually some samples in one of the songs, Lifelong Slumber, where you hear sort of power lines sort of hitting each other that are sort of dying out sort of thing. So it's that kind of sort of, I just wanted it to sort of be very, very dark and sort of paint a picture of where things might be headed, basically, through that post-apocalyptic vision. So I guess there wasn't a lot of light and there wasn't a lot of hope that I was trying to express there.
Do you feel that the new album is like more hopeful, or like this is not an intentional pun, but like a warmer perspective?
I do, because basically within this new album, Individuation, I'm taking a lot of cues from the famous psychoanalyst C.G. Jung and some of his concepts about personal development and inner work to try to bring about changes in one person's life that ultimately might lead to changes in like everybody's life, basically. So from that perspective, I think the lyrics on Individuation are in stark contrast to Contagium, which is like, this is kind of where we're headed if we don't pull our fingers out of our collective arse, so to speak. Whereas Individuation is like, here could be some answers for us to get out of that proverbial upcoming mess, so to speak. So yeah, I think it's sort of a juxtaposition. I didn't want to go down another sort of dark road again as I had done with that album. So given that I was sort of an armchair Jung enthusiast, I sort of wanted to try and present my own sort of idea of what some of those concepts meant to me on a personal level and how they've helped me ultimately get to a better place in life, I feel. So, yeah, in answer to your question, I think it's in direct opposition to the style of the lyrics in Contagium, this new album.
Speaking of other kind of trends we've viewed more so in terms of, I suppose, syntax, is that we saw that there's quite a bit of active voice that you use in your lyrics to describe things kind of in the moment. This isn't to say that you never use, past tense, but there's a lot of, ing, so running, kneeling, standing, touching words in your lyrics. All lines written in a style that almost seems as though you're kind of commanding someone to do something as they listen. So this runs across all your albums, but just to give like 2 examples from the new album, the first song has lines like employ these remnants of a dream, unpack these trauma wounds, or the chasm is deep, yet I descend, which all appear, in the now. And fear and loathing, stripping you backward, commitment and crisis beckons you forward, distraction disguises the quicksand, archetypal signpost calling you onward, from the song Archetypal, are all similarly, in the here and now. Are you kind of cognizant of this approach? Is something that you kind of generally prefer to adopt when you write lyrics?
Yeah, I think so. I believe, like, now that you're sort of describing that, I feel like maybe that is a general style that I do adopt. I could be wrong, but I don't really feel like I use a lot of I and we, but I might do for sort of different projects and different bands, but definitely for Subterranean, I guess it's, well, especially for this new album, Individuation, it's a lot of it is not I wouldn't say self-talk, but it's definitely sort of like not a how to do something, so to speak, but it's not sort of projecting it as into you should do this or this is the way things should be, but it's kind of like going forward through sort of different ideas and steps of progression through these different sort of things. Like there's a song called Shadow Work. So, within the Jung concepts, you sort of got to befriend your shadow to become sort of more whole as a person, so to speak. So, I definitely agree with sort of that sort of sentiment, and I think that's something I try to sort of employ to give the narrative like sort of a free-flowing movement, kind of, in a way. That's what's coming up for me at the moment anyway. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Why not take a perspective of something that's already happened? Like, why not? It seems like, I won't say never, because there is some past tense, but it does seem like the lyrics tend to avoid this happened. It's more like this is happening, or this will happen, or do this now. There's not a lot of like, this is what happened. There's certainly no song, I think, in your entire discography, which is all set in like, I'm telling a story that is over.
Right. Yeah. So it's more in the moment, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like I feel actually good about that. Because
Why? What do you mean?
Well, because sometimes we can live our lives in the past or in the future, but like what's happening now is the only thing that's happening. Like those things either haven't arisen or have gone, but mentally we might be still holding on to them in a positive, negative, or any way in between that. But like when you get into the flow of the moment, I guess that's some of the sort of metaphysical sort of stuff that I allude to here and there, or maybe strive to describe within some of the lyrics here in Subterranean. So hearing you say that sort of gives me a sort of light bulb moment. It's like, okay, I'm striving to be present within that moment of the song and the words that are there. So yeah, that's really cool.
Glad we brought it up then.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, regarding the style of language that you use in your lyrics, you seem to strike a balance between kind of more common, or what we might call accessible language, and more complex or otherwise kind of difficult vocabulary. So to give you an example, lines like "as the sun does set" and "I too shall follow," "below in the dirt," include words that most English users probably wouldn't struggle with. However, you also have lines that feature words like opiophagy, so which I assume is people who consume opium, which is a relatively archaic form. You also have words like detritus, atrabilius, contagium, and simulacrum, which are all kind of uncommon, even Latinate words, many of which we also had to look up. So is this contrast between relatively kind of simple and difficult vocabulary intentional? And what effect do you think that generates, for your average listener?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously some of the more straightforward things, it's easier to follow and whatnot. I guess I find when I use more obscure words, I'm looking for something a bit more poetic, a poetic way to say something instead of saying it a little bit more straightforward. So I'm going in between things that are like very basic, and then things that are a little bit more, just putting how would I put it? I guess line by line, I'm just sort of like deciding whether this needs to be a little bit more straightforward, or I got a bit of room to be a little bit more vague, or use something that might catch someone off guard and go, oh, what's that word? And then if I've made someone look up a word, that's pretty cool. But it's mainly down to, like, also sometimes I'll come across stuff as I read. I'm like, that's awesome, and I really like the context and the power of this word. So I'll either jot it down or I'll keep it in mind, and then eventually it'll get to the spot where, yes, and you hear, I'll pop it in. So that might be a bit of a selfish thing on my part as well. It's just like adding things in that I sort of think cool, and I like the sound of the word, and I like that it's obscure. So there's kind of no sort of rhyme or reason. I guess to some degree my lyric writing is just completely selfish. I need to be satisfied at the end of the day, and then when it goes out there, if I get feedback of one way or any way, like I was saying before, it's all down to interpretation and stuff. I've been lucky with the reviews for the first two albums to sort of have a lot of European reviewers sort of talk a little bit about penmanship and stuff like that, and that's nice, but it's not really something that I'm striving for. I'm striving for having a finished set of lyrics and then a recording, and then if I look back at them both, I'm like, yes, I think I've done my best here to try and describe what I was trying to get to. So that's sort of my process. It's like, as long as I'm happy, that's cool. And then it's all down to how other people may or may not interpret it.
Has anyone ever asked you about these terms after a show, or what they mean? Do you hope fans will look them up, or if they make do you want them to make the effort to kind of read through and figure out what the words are?
For sure. Well, if I didn't want anyone to make any effort, then I would just keep the lyrics off the products or offline. It's there for people to check out. Having said that, I feel like most of my career, lyrics have never been a thing that's rarely come up within the metal sort of stuff. It's here and there, but generally it's just like, okay, you guys play fast and loud or slow and loud, and there's growling. That's awesome. I love it. But here and there, like as I was saying, sort of some interviews and some reviews, they would pick up on some things like that. And so it's always good to know that someone is reading out there. And then, we get to do something like this where it's all about lyrics. So I'm like a pig in shit right now. So it's really good.
Well, regardless of the relative like simplicity or complexity of your lyrics can't really be mistaken for what we would call like everyday talk in English, right? So, for instance, most people aren't walking around saying stuff like floundering in paradoxical pretense, thwarted by the blaze of your own self-hatred. So, even if we take lines like you mentioned earlier, like, and I too shall follow, like, even if all these words are ones that the average English user would recognize, I doubt that most English users would arrange the words using that kind of syntax. So do you consciously try and use language in a way that's distinct from how you might communicate in daily life? And if so, again, like, what's the purpose of doing this?
Okay, well, so specifically with that song you were sort of referencing, Haunted Optimist, it was all about the accents. I was following the accents of the guitar. So I needed to have simple words to go in. So like the riff was like, dun-dun-dun, dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun. And so I was using shorter words to be able to within small syllables to fit that riff, so there was space for the drums and the other things that were percussively going on. So I guess I approach lyrics in a very musical way, I guess, and sometimes that will lead you to using like different combinations of syllables and words to get that point across. And sometimes it might not even be so much more about the meaning than just having the right vocalization, and you go back and go, all right, well, what does that mean? And then it might be 4 or 5 years later, the penny drops. I'm like, oh, okay. And sometimes the meanings of different lyrics will change within that. But I think that I approach these things from that kind of scope. There's always got to be sort of the music first. I don't really sort of sit down and write lyrics and then try and match it to a piece of music. Just coming as a multi-instrumentalist, it's always coming up with the sounds and the ideas, and then the lyrics are a reflection of what I hear back from like doing the recordings, or listening to a recording of your band playing through a new tune or whatever, and then getting inspired to find out where it is. And like sometimes I might have like a certain rhythm and I'll play like Hangman, and I'll just put the syllables as dashes, and then I'll just play around with it and see what words can fit into that configuration. And sometimes it's nonsense. And similarly, I might approach it and record stuff at home where I'm being guttural and I'm doing things rhythmically, but it's all gibberish. And then I'll sit there and I'll go, what is that word? That kind of sounds like a word. And I'll write these things out, and it'll, at first I'll write all these words that don't have any meaning together. And then slowly I'll scrape away at that. That's sort of like a vocal technique, a lyric writing technique that a lot of different sort of artists have sort of used. And it's just something that I've been sort of doing in the last 10 to 15 years here and there. Sometimes lines will come out, other times it's like, all right, I'm just going to like scream no words at this, and then slowly I'll write to these little inflections that I've made off the top of my head, basically. So I don't know if I'm going on a tangent or not, but I'm just sort of expressing. It's more like the writing is the key, and then the words kind of follow, and then they get shaped afterwards in a lot of cases.
Well, I guess I'm gonna like push back on this a little bit, because they get shaped, but they could be, you ultimately shape them into what they are, and that shape is words like floundering or paradoxical or thwarted or opiophagy or detritus attributes, these you could easily theoretically, right, you could easily just instead of saying thwarted, you could say blocked. You need an extra syllable. You can jam it in there, if you want. You just add another syllable, right? So why do they get shaped into the way that they are shaped, right? Like why do they keep coming up? Why does the shape keep ending up being a shape that is not the day-to-day language, like Jess said, right? Like why not just like a casual shape? Why not a more, one syllable word shape? Why not a shape that only involves the English that we speak in 2023, right? Where does thwarted come from? Why is that the shape that comes up? Why does it come up again and again?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that goes back to like being a bit more poetic, or trying to be a bit more word romantic or whatever. So you're right. Yeah, there's more direct ways to say thwarted for sure. But I guess at whatever point that line was getting made, I felt that like that song Embittered is about sort of self-defeatism. So if you thwart yourself, that's even more full on than blocking yourself, you know what I mean? So it's a bit for that particular thing, it's about that description and how that description makes me feel when I feel that song is complete. And so, for sure, you're right. It definitely gets shaped, and sometimes I'll go off on those tangents where I'll try and find something that sort of really sparks my imagination when I read that line back, or I hear that line back as I've sung it.
Why, I guess, to build off that, why do you care about being poetic? Like, aren't we metal, right? Aren't we supposed to be like, dark and down with society and like against the ivory towers? Like, where does the desire to be poetic come from?
That comes from, like, I guess the other side of like reading books, not poetry, but like books that it can be poetic. Mm-hmm. And so like the energy of writing in a printed format is so that there's two sides there, I guess. In that question that you're bringing up, there's a side of me trying to fit words into the song that will fit that, but then there's also another side of me going in there that wants to just have that excitement in the line. And as I was saying before, like I really like to sort of feed off the energy of either reading someone's lyrics or reading my own back, just to make sure this is how I want to express it, sort of thing. And I guess, some of those, the ways that I've been inspired by writers of novels or short stories or whatever have expressed a certain thing that they, you don't really express in everyday language. That sort of creeps in there. So, there you go. I am a bit a Jekyll and Hyde of writing. Yeah, there's some conflicting sort of things going on there.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, like, you do like to write your lyrics down and see how they appear to you, and that's like, part of your editing process. Would there be a difference in how the lyrics kind of appear to you, like just visually, if you were to write, and I will go after instead of and I too shall follow?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there's like, a difference between the kind of visual image of your lyrics when you look at them after you've written down in the editing process. If you were to read, a line like you have written, and I too shall follow, how does that appear different to you, like visually, in a way that seems more suitable for the music than a line that would be written in more everyday English language, like, and I will go after? So that those two lines mean the same thing. One, much more kind of poetic, much more removed from the everyday linguistic context. The other, much more embedded in that context.
Gotcha. I guess I'm just favouring the way that feels, looks and sounds, as in the one that might not be spoken as we're having like a normal conversation in 2023. I guess maybe within like sort of the style of doom, death and stuff, especially early in the 90s, they would sort of favour these kind of things that are a little bit more pompous and a little bit more romantic in a verbal or word sense. So I guess there's a little bit of sort of a nod to that. And it's just, at the end of the day, I guess those choices are there. It's just because I've going in between these sorts of things and not really kind of thinking about those sort of contexts within it. It's just more about how I'm feeling about like hearing, seeing, and reading what's been written for that particular music.
Well, maybe we can unpack this further by kind of looking at another kind of feature of your lyrics, which is related to that which we've just discussed, which is, the use of relatively archaic forms. So, we mentioned before shall and thwart, which, are technically modern English, but are rarely used in modern English contexts. This forms part of a larger pattern where we do see some kind of older sounding words sprinkled in otherwise modern day English lyrics. Maybe a clearer example of this is, the use of the Old English thee, which appears once in your lyrics on your first album, in the line, for what each make haste to awaken the depth in thee, from the song Seven Sisters of Sleep. As no doubt you already know, metal is kind of well recognized for its penchant for, archaic expression, including, the use of thee and thou, which is very well documented. We were wondering, what made you include thee and other kind of archaic forms in your lyrics? Is it kind of connected to this desire to create kind of romantic lyrics, or, are you intending to make your lyrics look older? And if so, for what purpose?
Okay. I'm not striving to make them look older. If anything, it would be sort of a more romantic use of language. Particularly in that case, the Seven Sisters of Sleep was a very old book that sort of alluded to different drug use at the time, maybe the late 1800s. I can't remember really now, but the actual sort of name of the book, Seven Sisters of Sleep. So that song is kind of like a kind of backwards book study, if you like. And reading that book was very difficult because that uses a lot of that sort of language. So I think in direct reference to sort of that song and maybe leaking out into some of the other lyrics in the Subterranean canon, maybe that's like sort of the jump off point of where I was like, I really like the way that they were expressing that, 100 years or more ago. And it's sort of leaked over a little bit here and there as I've sort of used it. So the Seven Sisters of Sleep was definitely a sort of a throwback to looking at that style of expression within sort of a drug culture of 100 years ago and stuff like that. And then I could definitely see that maybe in writing different other topics or whatever, some of that has come up from there, maybe perhaps. So
Well, in addition to difficult vocabulary and old vocabulary, there's some other patterns in your lyrics that we saw, such as like the use of rhyming and alliteration on occasion. Not all your songs rhyme, not all your lines rhyme, but there's a pretty consistent presence of rhyming across your 3 releases. On the first album, you have lines like "Leave it up to me to prolong this agony, it happens automatically." On the second, there's "Bear this crux of self-disgust, paint the 4 walls black, let the eyes roll back, adhere to the redux of the mistrust." And then finally, your latest album is the rhymes like "Alone with no compass, self-destructive umbrage, longing for silence, exploding with violence." Is there a reason why you rhyme consistently? Not constantly, but consistently? Is it just about creating like the chorus, or is there something more that you feel rhyme adds to the impact of your lyrics?
I think with those 2 examples, the one in Embittered is definitely like maybe a more hooky kind of thing. If I think about the song in question, it comes out of a very large, expansive part into a sort of build-up part, and I guess I was using that to sort of lure people back into like a heavier section. So I was using rhyme specifically there to sort of give the vocals a little bit more of a hook. I mean, there's no sort of blazing choruses that are super catchy in any of this music, but if I was trying to do something akin to that, it might be a little bit like that in that section. As far as the other one that you mentioned, Arduous, that was more in a melodic sense. So I'd probably written the first line and it felt good to sing it that way. I haven't sung in major amounts in Subterranean, but definitely on this new album, there's a lot more clean singing than the first two. And I find, especially having vocal coaching within clean singing and stuff, you get to sort of recognize where your mouth placements are for vowels and stuff like that. So with that one, I would have been like, oh, cool, this sits really well, and I can get the tone of the note really nicely. So it would have followed that, like, okay, let's try and get this same type of vowel going. And so obviously it would start to rhyme from there, kind of thing. So that's what comes to mind for those two specific things.
Like not in the specific, more broadly, like you talked about, you write the lyrics and then you kind of carve you write the music and then you kind of carve the lyrics out, but you don't randomly end up with a bunch of rhymes scattered throughout your lyrics, right? It requires, like, rhyming a word with another word requires some kind of conscious sitting down and thinking about what words rhyme and popping it out. And it's not like rhyme only appears on the new album. It's not like rhyme only appears in choruses, but it does appear like regularly throughout 10 plus years. What draws you to rhyme? Why does it exist in your music? Not in one song, but like just as a thing that you do throughout everything you do.
I love hip hop music.
It's a good reason. It's a great reason.
Well, my love of rhyme comes from that. Interesting fact, I actually had a hip hop band called Brutalica about 15 to 16 years ago.
Oh shit!
So that kind of ties in with Lingua Brutalica there.
Yeah,
no, that's a reference. we got albums.
Yeah. So I would say that, like, it's never a direct influence, but I love the form that rhymes take, and the how do I say, the heights that some MC lyricists have taken the art of rhyming. So, like, given that that's a big passion of mine musically, it's gonna come out, and sometimes it is in different things that I do. So there's that, and then sometimes there's I go back to that energy thing. Sometimes to have rhyme at the end of a sentence in the flow of a verse or whatever part of the music it is just feels like the right thing to do, basically. So it's more, it comes down to that thing again of, like, what's the best way to sort of do that sort of thing, and if it is to rhyme, then it's to rhyme, but, like, it doesn't always end up that way either. So
while you're speaking, I wanted to let you know, I looked it up, and your rap project is not listed on Encyclopedia Metallum.
Nah. I have done other hip hop stuff as well, but that was definitely a very underground thing.
Okay. Yeah. Wait, can I just say, this is completely unrelated language, but you're in so many projects here, and so I guess if anyone's listening wants to check out your music, give them something to check out. But I'm going to list what they have you in, and I guess could you just tell how many projects are missing? Like let's say, is it a half dozen? Is it a dozen? They have listed you as obviously Subterranean, Canyonero, Cryptal Darkness, Damaged, Earth, Hellspawn, Insomnious Day, Order of Chaos, and The Eternal.
Okay, well, that's a fair chunk of stuff. The other thing that comes to mind, I was in a black metal band called Hellspawn.
They got Hellspawn as on keyboards.
Yeah. So that's a fair chunk of thing, but I can't really think off the top of my head. But there is missing things, and there's things that are definitely not in the rock or metal genre.
Okay.
I've done improvised saxophone stuff recently. I've done some stuff that's classified as doom jazz. I've done hip hop stuff. I've done noise stuff. So there's a whole bunch of things not there, but some of these projects that or some of these styles that I'm just telling you about that I've done projects with and for, not always like super visible. Basically, sometimes I just do things and then just put them on the internet and don't tell anyone.
Is there a partition that you keep between these genres, or does obviously the hip hop bleeds into the metal? You just said, you mentioned that. Does the death metal bleed into the hip hop? Does the jazz bleed into the hip hop? Does the hip hop bleed into are there walls on the language front, not the musical front, but are there walls on the language or does it all kind of just, are they porous? Do they just kind of all run into each other? I'm going to take out my metal notepad, right? Or my.
Well, I think that when you're in a sort of specific genre, you sort of stick to the vocabulary to a degree. So it's not like I'm using any of these sort of more archaic words if I'm doing a song that's a hip hop song with a rhyme. Or if I'm Canoncal was a stoner band. So if I was crooning a stoner song, it's going to be a sort of different approach lyrically, but there would be little things that sort of bleed over here and there, like turns of phrase, just something you might have learnt from a different genre, but then you're I can put this in here, but no one's really going to know it's come from there, so to speak. Do you know what I mean? It's more like little techniques and things you sort of learn that you don't really kind of share with anyone except for musicians, perhaps at different times here and there. Yeah. That's really interesting, though. It's not something that I've really actually thought about too much. So, yeah, really cool.
All right. Well, then to kind of move back to the rhyme and alliteration thing. With alliteration, there's quite a lot that appears as well. You're, on your first album, you have lines like "Votaries of the Vixen, Virginia, bear not to be without her brown gold touch." On the second, you have, that's from the song Seven Sisters of Sleep, which is, of course, itself is an alliteration. On their second, you have collective coffin culture hits the final nail. And on the third, the new one, there's commitment and crisis beckons you forward, distraction disguises the quicksand. What motivates the use of alliteration like this?
Can you guys describe alliteration for me?
Oh, yeah, sure. Using the words repeated, officially 3, I think. Is that right, Jess? It's 3 is an alliteration formally. Is that right?
Yeah, formally 3, but I think people according to kind of common perception, 2 is often, enough.
Yeah, well, they start with the exact same sound or letter. So
I see. Okay, so votaries,
Vixen, Virginia,
triple V.
Yeah, commitment, crisis, distraction, disguise, stuff like that.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. It wouldn't have been conscious. It's here's a chance for some more alliteration, because obviously I just had to ask what it was. But I guess it also goes down to what's being described and in terms of how that's put to the music. And I guess it's strange that it's sort of come up a few times. I guess it's a sort of technique. I guess it's also that sort of energy thing. Yeah, I would have definitely seen the 3 V's and cool, and the way that sounds. Votaries of the Vixen, Virginia, it's oh yeah, that sounds cool to me, sort of thing. So it's not really the most insightful answer, but I think it's just down to that time where I was putting it together, and I just really, really liked how it flowed.
Right. Well, we've talked so far about kind of consistent patterns that we've observed across your releases, but now we want to talk about some notable differences that we observed. So specifically with reference to pronouns. So starting with your first album, there are 23 instances of I, my, and me, 27 then of we and our. On your second album, there's no I at all, and only 12 instances of we and our, and just 1 instance of you. Then the first person singular perspective resurfaces on the third album with just 5 instances of I, me, and my, in addition to 6 of we, our, and us, and then just 7 of you and your. So were you kind of intentionally shifting your use of pronouns across these different releases? Did you consciously attempt to use fewer pronouns after your...
No, not at all. It's one of those things, like, I guess as lyricists, you don't, well, I can only speak personally, but it's like, it's always just focused on the task at hand. And if you're writing that song, I'm not comparing it to the song that came before or after it. So yeah, but that's really interesting. I know as listening to your guys' podcast quite often, this comes up, and I guess the answer for a lot of people is kind of the same. It's like, oh no, I had no idea, I was doing that. But it's interesting in between the 3 albums and the count that you described, that we and our was the one that came up the most for Contagium, and I guess that falls into talking more collectively, as in it, and not talking more personally. So it's more, all right, collectively we're like, in a post-apocalyptic world, shit has hit the fan for us, and our survival and that kind of thing. So that makes a lot of sense that I and you is very minimal in that second album. But as far as like going across all the 3, it's always just writing for the music at hand, and then sort of only seeing these things sort of come up in a conversation like this, basically.
So if the we is like all of us often, is the I generally you specifically?
I would say generally yes, unless I was specifically writing as a character that wasn't me, and I can't really think for Subterranean of a time that might be, except for maybe perhaps embittered, as we've sort of talked about a little bit. But that can also be self-reflective too. So it's kind of really hard to say. But generally, I think if I'm using I, then it's something that, like, yeah, I'm personally talking about.
What about the increase in the use of you and your on this new album? Is there someone specifically you're talking about when you refer to them as you/your?
It's really interesting. It would come down to, like, having the lyrics in front of me and going, oh, okay, I see where I'm going with that. But I'm not particularly sure as an overview. It's actually really, really fresh because we just sort of finished recording it and whatnot. And there's always a period of abandoning your child after you record it and before it gets released. So yeah, it's kind of a hard one to say on that, but it's definitely something I could sort of look back and get back to you on that one.
Do you want me to give you an example right now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, please do.
Well, okay, so on the song Individuation, you have fear and loathing stripping you backward, commitment and crisis beckons you forward, distraction disguises this quicksand, archetypal signpost calling you onward. 3 U's in a row, right?
Yeah. That's really interesting. I guess, for that, it's me describing someone's journey, and obviously the song title "Arduous Becoming." It's like someone's really hard journey into becoming themselves. So yeah, I'm speaking to. I guess in a way, I'm speaking to somebody's journey, and it's like, okay, all these hard things happened, but these are the things that you might not have seen at the time that was like making that journey into the person you are, sort of thing. So yeah, I'm talking to a non-defined, but like we all go through tough times, right? So it's kind of like a you thing, but it could definitely I could be talking to myself in the mirror at the same time as well. So it's general, but it's also projected outwards too.
Right. Well, for our final pronoun question, we wanted to ask you about kind of an anomaly, I guess we could say, in your use of pronominal forms that appears on your first album and then largely disappears off the following two. So specifically, the first album featured 10 uses of she and her. Many of these do appear in the song Seven Sisters of Sleep, which we might expect because, of course, this song references the feminine figures that stand in for the 7 drugs mentioned in the book Seven Sisters of Sleep that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
However, other uses of she and her do appear still in songs like Between Apes and Angel, with lines, towards the end and ever beyond limitations, wake her from inside, raise she from dreams, and prolong this agony with lines out of her storm to deep blue serene. And there are actually 2 instances of her that do appear in the first song, Wooden Kimono Fixative of your second album, appearing in the lines raped, defiled, and plundered, her abundance in spades, and castrate her impotent. So in these songs, it isn't totally clear who she refers to with the exclusion of, Seven Sisters of Sleep. So is the she a specific person here, or is it just a feminine figure? And why does she appear, only occasionally on the first album, then, hardly at all on the following 2?
Yeah, okay. Well, for the instances of prolong this agony and the use of she, that was definitely a person. So I know you guys talk about the use of can you write a doom metal or a death metal love song, and prolong is kind of a really backward sort of love song in a way. So that's actually a personal she. Whereas in Wooden Kimono Fixation is more so setting the stage for post-apocalyptic meltdown, and she refers to as in Mother Earth or Mother Nature. So so you within those 2 different contexts, there's the personal, as in personal relationships, and then also the feminine, as in, like, as they say, Mother Nature or Mother Earth sort of thing. So that refers to those specific things. And then, as in Seven Sisters of Sleep, that's exactly on the money with, how that was described.
Well, regarding the names for the drugs that come up here, Virginia, Mary Jane, Amadi, etc., where do these exactly come from? Like, we recognize some, the ones that are familiar and modern, like Mary Jane for weed, Lucille for LSD, but the other ones appear a bit more obscure, archaic. Virginia, maybe tobacco, Amantia, mushrooms, ecstasis, ecstasy, euthoxylinia, cocaine, morphinia, morphine, or opium. Are these all drawn directly from the book, or did you actively try to combine more modern slang with the more archaic terms? That's really cool that you bring that up. I think at the time, what I did was I wanted to have specific names for like a feminine drug entity or a spiritual drug entity, and some I wrote down, the Mary Jane or Virginia being tobacco. And there was other ones that I couldn't really sort of like think of what they could be, and they weren't specifically from the book. But I sort of set about asking a few like female friends to sort of do a bit of research for me and come up with some names and stuff. And so, I got back all these sort of different names, and I used the ones that I thought was like sort of the most cool sounding or whatever. And even maybe 1 or 2 of them could be like made up. So, it was basically just sort of a fun little exercise. It was like, I want to have specific names and sort of call them out or invoke them in that part of the song, which is like a real sort of build up to like a breakdown moment. That was a little sort of thing. It was like, this is a little bit beyond me. So I opened up
to my circle of friends in conversation, and they had a lot of fun, like doing a little bit of research or just thinking creatively, and between like 3 or 4 of us, we came back and sort of made that little part from that. So yeah, it's not something I thought about for a very long time. So yeah.
Cool. Well, we also wanted to talk about stuff that isn't in your lyrics, as we usually do. So the first is discussions of gore. So although, as we've discussed, there is a lot of death and kind of darkness in your lyrics, there's not much like explicit violence, if any at all, really. Is there a reason why you've kind of avoided explicit gore and kept it pretty minimal in your lyric writing?
Yeah, as I was saying before, like as growing up in the extreme metal scene, it's not something that I was attracted to. So when you're 20 years old and all your mates are like, yeah, Cannibal Corpse and this and that, I was just like, wasn't so much as captivated by their uses of gore and some of like the horror sort of styles of some of the death metal bands. So I guess I made a conscious effort not to sort of like go into those territories, even if I'm talking about sort of dark things. I try and more put it in maybe more poetic light, or in different styles, and maybe be a bit more sort of vague about it, and not. I don't want to I don't use lyrics to sort of like shock people or do anything like that. So it's mainly to just kind of like avoid some of those things. But I mean, yeah, there is dark themes there, but I want to put it in a more interesting way than just like a hammer horror kind of thing, or just a shock value kind of thing, for sure.
Why do you think that hammer horror kind of stuff never appealed to you, even as a young metal lad?
Yeah, that's very strange. Well, maybe it goes back to like listening to lots of different styles of music before metal, and not being in that sort of teenage thing where you'd sit around and watch like lots of horror films. As a young dude, I was more into like a younger dude, like early teenage years. I was more into graffiti and hip hop, to be honest. And so that was a totally different world. And yeah, I never sort of crossed over into loving the horror genre, and I don't have nothing against it. Personally, it's just something that I just didn't take inspiration from, to be honest, but I know it has a big place in metal, and I can respect that. And to it's a bit in there, but I think some of it can take it a bit too far, but that's up to the people putting that out and the people listening to that. If I don't like something, then I won't pay attention to it.
Well, what about then the use of swearing? Because there's almost no swearing in your lyrics either, just one damn and one use of hell. Their uses are a damning sentence, and then hell is a location. And I'm guessing this is, I don't know, just what do you think? You maybe been one of the less sweary podcast hosts guests we've had. I don't think you've been dropping any.
I've been watching my tongue. I don't really swear like a sailor. I can jump in that circle from time to time, but on a personal level, I don't tend to communicate that way. I'm a bit more soft-spoken and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I have sworn definitely in lyrics in other bands. Another band I have, Order of Chaos. We were a death metal band that sort of merged into the sort of hardcore / death metal and stuff. And I have a new project that's like a D-beat Swedish death metal kind of crossover sort of thing, and there's a bit of swearing in there, and that's always for an effect of a line more, and sometimes just gratuitously, like on the beat, just as a feeling kind of thing. But we're not really talking about that. We're talking about Subterranean. So yeah, I've consciously avoided any of that. I don't think it wouldn't have any it wouldn't excite me to have any impact for me to sort of put that in there. I feel like that would be out of place for what I'm sort of the things I'm trying to describe, basically. So
why? What would make it out of place?
I guess it's just a personal feeling. I mean, like, it's not going to really enhance kind of what I'm sort of saying unless it was like in the context of like a big build up or something like that, and it was just a big sort of scream that, I don't know, if I was saying fuck in a scream at an appropriate time sort of thing. I mean, these sort of things can come up sometimes live. You just sort of go a bit ad lib, and if that's a swear word, then so be it. But within the writing and recording sort of thing, I'm sort of focused on, and just not using those sort of words. It may come up though. Like, I don't have anything against it. I just haven't done it, in Subterranean's career so far.
What about like on-stage banter? Like if you're at a show in Australia and you're bantering with the crowd?
Yeah, of course I've done that. Yeah. It can be quite strange because we're playing this music and then you sort of want to rev the crowd up. So I might go into my more bogan voice or something to make them scream a little bit louder or something like that, which sometimes can feel like a little bit at odds. But I mean, that's live. It's, people kind of expect that to a degree, and I would use that tongue in cheek, to sort of rev people up or get them to sort of reciprocate, make some noise, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I definitely do that sort of stuff. But as far as like, putting it into like in music for Subterranean, I just haven't felt the need to do so far.
How about like Australianisms in general then? Because we don't really see those in your lyrics. Do you think that like there's a reason for which you kind of go for a more kind of quote unquote neutral style of English rather than like a typical kind of Australian English style?
Yeah, interesting. I've never really thought about it, but I guess within everything that we've been talking about, and sort of the plain English through to the more archaic and romantic kind of stuff. I feel like so far I feel anything that would be more sort of Australian may not fit, or I just haven't sort of hasn't come across as being viable to do sort of thing. But that, yet again, I'm not going to sort of like rule it out per se, but it's just something that sort of hasn't come up. I guess like touring with some doom metal bands over in Europe and stuff, and sort of looking towards that sort of doom death stuff in the 90s of the British scene or whatever. I guess I'm sort of more sort of nodding to that sort of style of English than sort of your Aussie sort of stuff.
So do you think there's a conscious effort in your lyrics to like fit into a specific, I mean, I'm trying not to use the word chronotype in in a casual podcast, but like an instance in time space. Like, do you feel like your lyrics are trying to, I don't want to say like a box, but like, is there a goal to situate them within like the style of doom death, whatever that is, and like the conception that you have of it coming from its origins?
To a degree, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess as I started it, I was like, I'm inspired by this, and I didn't want to sort of ape it wholesale, but I wanted to sort of put a nod to that as like, something that was inspiring as I grew up. But yeah, there's bands out there that will sort of do the whole 9 yards. It's like, okay, we're this style of 90s doom death, in sound and lyrics and everything. I get a bit sort of restless, so while I do nod to that, I will sort of add different things that I've learned from different sort of places and make it a little bit more of a mashup. But I think some of the basis of that from the first album was definitely sort of that nod to the lineage of where that style was sort of coming from for me. So, and I think, yeah, like talking to you guys, I can see it sort of carried forth in between the releases to a certain extent, but there's other things in there as well. So, yeah, for sure.
Do you think being in Australia though influences your lyrics in any way? Like you mentioned fire earlier, right? That it's more of a hot country than a cold one, although it's quite cold at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Let me actually give some context here. That there's a lot of research on the Australian metal scene, and a lot of it's focused on this idea of finding what makes Australian metal, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of answers I come up with, but like, do you personally think that being Australian or being in Australia or a speaker of Australian English, does that affect how Subterranean Disposition's music, especially for this podcast, their lyrics are formed? Or is that not really a concern to your personal approach to production?
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. It's not really something that I'm sort of super conscious or concerned about. It's more about serving the music, serving the song, and then serving the words and the energy of that. It's strange that you bring that up, because is the Australian thing a sound, or is it a personality about the sound and a personality about the people, perhaps? You know what I mean? And that's the things that are sort of coming up as I was listening to your question, sort of thing. And being that I have sort of toured overseas a bunch of times, playing with European bands and stuff, it would be more like, there's something in the water here that sort of makes us play and sound a certain way. And obviously that's our personalities and how we've grown up and the environment that we've been into. It's kind of, it's hard to get to the core of and have it be definable. There's so many sort of variables to it. But as far as your question, it's not something that I focus on.
Well, I guess that, yeah.
So if we can kind of round out this sorry, go ahead.
No. We have there's a bit of lag. Go ahead. We'll John, our editor should cut this out, but we just you were I thought you were going to go for it, and then there was like a delay, so I was like, I'll just do it. You might be lagged, but no, you pop off. I had the last few questions, so why don't you leave this one?
Righto, yeah. Well, if we can kind of round out this interview and kind of tie everything together, what would you say is the role of lyrics in Subterranean Disposition's music and in the extreme metal subgenre?
Sorry, the extreme metal subgenre, I didn't hear the last word.
Oh, more broadly.
More broadly.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's a great question. It's a big question. I guess for me, the lyrics for Subterranean is always a personal thing. As I said a few times throughout talking to you guys, it just comes down to, it's been a solo project that I've done for many years, and it's only recently that I have members with me now, and I do like the bulk of the music writing, if not all of the music writing and lyric writing. And I guess it's just a platform for me to express myself, basically, in any form that's going to take within the music that I've written. So it's just a way to sort of delve into different topics that sort of come to mind, or I get inspired by either through the music or closely tied sort of to the feeling of the music and what I want to sort of not social commentary, but like sometimes personal commentary, social commentary, book commentary, all those sorts of things. So it's just really basically my sort of outlet that goes along with this music. And yeah, it's something that I'm grateful I started and have continued with up until now. In the broader context, it's really, really hard to say. I feel like maybe perhaps there's some things there that I can add to the broader metal community that maybe don't get approached in the same way just because I am me and I can't be anyone else. And if that's a positive or a negative thing, I can't really sort of say. That's up to subjective to the listener or whatever. I can only offer up what I sort of do, and I really love the process of writing music and creating lyrics and making albums essentially, and I'm just crass enough to sort of throw it out there into the public and to see what might happen. And more often than not, we're able to go out there and play a few shows and talk to some people that have enjoyed it, and like that's a bonus, you know. But the crux of it is, I'm a music lifer and an avid book reader for life, and Subterranean. I'm able to sort of marry some of those two passions sort of together and just be creative, you know. And it's a really good part of life.
Nice. Well, so the new album's coming out pretty soon, right? Where can people go to check it out and have a listen?
Yeah, for sure. The new album Individuation is coming out on Saturday, June 24. And initially that's going to be online, so it'll be on Spotify and also on our record label, Hypnotic Dirge Records, their Bandcamp. And then there'll be a pre-order for some CDs coming out in August, and hopefully some vinyl as well later on in the year. So yeah, we're just basically doing digital first and then looking at physical formats as it comes up and as people sort of ask for it, sort of thing. So yeah, it's exciting. It's been 7 years since the last album, and time to sort of go out and play a few live shows and let go of these songs and breathe a sigh of relief. I've been sitting with them for far too long.
For sure. Well, actually, so you reached out here, right, to speak with us, which is, by the way, if anyone, if you're listening and you're in an extreme metal band and you want to save us some time, feel free to reach out. We're happy to chat.
Please.
Yeah. Is there anything, it's better than us messaging everyone on Facebook and getting no responses. Is there anything like that you expected us to ask, or that you wanted us to ask about and we didn't? Like, did we miss something?
No, I find that everything that you guys asked is very, very thorough, and even like being a listener of the podcast, I expected a few of the questions that sort of come up sort of in most every episode, but there was some ones that I mean, you guys delve into the lyrics of each guest really, really thoroughly, and I've really enjoyed sort of the feedback about the different sort of different linguistic things about some of the bullshit that I write. So no, it's been really good. I found it to be really, really enjoyable chat, and I've got some things to think about, that's for sure.
Well, fourth album, maybe you can sneak in some themes that see if we can't like miss them. Try to trip us up.
yeah. I'll definitely use some of these sort of concepts and different things going forward, and everything that everyone you speak to, and everything in life can be fodder for lyrics and creative outlets. So you never know.
Well, awesome. Thanks. It was lovely chatting with you.
Yeah,
thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
All right, cool. That was great. Thank you so much. I think that'll be really good.
Cool.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present.